My daughter handed me papers and said sweetly, "Mom, just sign here, it's for your own good." I was about to sign when the lawyer grabbed my hand and whispered, "If you sign this, you'll lose everything." I pulled my hand back. The next morning, my daughter and her husband showed up at my door screaming because they found out what I did instead. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment from which part of the world you are watching. Get comfortable and relax. Let's begin. The pen felt heavy in my hand. It was a simple blue ballpoint, the kind the bank gives away. Vanessa had placed it there, her fingers brushing mine with a practiced tenderness. The kitchen table was warm under my other palm, the afternoon sun cutting across the polished wood. I had baked that morning. The scent of cinnamon and nutmeg still hung in the air, a sweetness meant to coat the occasion. "It's just a formality, Mom," Vanessa said, her smile smooth as glass. She sat across from me, leaning forward. "A living trust update. It's for your protection. Makes everything easier for us for you if anything ever happens." "Standard procedure," Marcus added from his perch by the refrigerator. He was holding a mug of coffee I'd made for him. His tone was light, dismissive of the thick stack of papers before me. "We just want to ensure your wishes are carried out. You've said you want to stay in this house forever. This ensures that." I looked at my daughter's face. Her eyes, so like her father's, were bright and encouraging. She had framed this visit as a loving gesture, a responsible adult child helping her aging mother put affairs in order. For weeks, she had spoken of peace of mind, of avoiding probate, of making sure the family was taken care of. I felt a familiar ache, a lonely warmth. My only child here caring for me. After Robert died, her attention had become a rare and precious thing. I wanted to deserve it. The top page was dense with text. The headers were bold, legal, durable power of attorney, grant deed, revocable transfer on death deed. I am a retired librarian. I have spent a lifetime navigating indexes, cross-references, complex cataloging systems. I know how to find meaning in dense text. But this language was a different country, and my trusted guides were translating. I felt a flicker, a librarian's instinct, something shelved in the wrong section. The feeling was quiet, easily ignored under the weight of Vanessa's expectant gaze. "It looks very official," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "That's the law for you," Marcus chuckled. It was not a warm sound. "Don't worry about the legalese. The gist is simple. You name Vanessa as your agent to help with decisions, and the house goes smoothly to her when the time comes, which is hopefully decades from now." He took a sip of coffee. "We're just planning ahead, being smart." Vanessa reached out and tapped a blank line near the bottom of the first page. "Just sign here, Mom, and initial here and here." Her nail, perfectly manicured, clicked against the paper, a roadmap of obedience. I lifted the pen. The sun caught the silver band on my finger, Robert's ring, which I still wore. This house. We bought it with his teacher's salary and my library wages. Every scuff on the floorboard near the sink was from his heavy work boots. The faint stain on the ceiling in the corner was from a leak we fixed together, laughing in the rain. It was not just an asset. It was my life, compressed into plaster and memory. And here was my daughter, offering me a way to give it to her neatly, efficiently. I positioned the pen point. The ink hovered over the line where my name was supposed to go. Eleanor Banks. I started the E. The front door chime rang. We all started. Marcus frowned. "Are you expecting someone?" "No," I said, the pen pausing. A relief, so small I barely acknowledged it, washed through me. "Ignore it," Vanessa said quickly, her hand pressing down on the table. "They'll go away. Let's finish this first." But the chime rang again, followed by a firm, familiar knock. "Ellie, it's David Chen. We had a 4 o'clock consultation." I had completely forgotten. David Chen was the estate lawyer recommended by Bernice from my book club. After Robert died, I had never updated my own will. A loose end. Bernice had been nagging me for months to tie it up. I'd finally made the appointment, a task for a Tuesday afternoon, now colliding with this. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," I said, placing the pen down with a decisive click. "I have to get that. I made this appointment ages ago." I stood, my knees protesting. The movement broke the strange, pressurized stillness that had filled my kitchen. Vanessa's smile tightened. "Mom, this will just take a second. We can deal with your lawyer after." "It's my time he's scheduled," I said and walked to the door. David Chen stood on my porch, a leather briefcase in hand. He was a man with kind eyes behind wire-framed glasses. He smiled. "Ellie, right on time." "Come in, David. Forgive me, I have family here." I led him into the kitchen. Introductions were made, my daughter Vanessa, her husband Marcus. David shook their hands, his demeanor professional, open. His eyes took in the scene. The cozy kitchen, the cooling coffee cake on the counter, the legal documents fanned across the table. "We were just helping my mother with some paperwork," Vanessa said, her voice regaining its smooth pitch. "A family trust." "I see," David said. His gaze lingered on the top page for a fraction too long. He knew the forms. I saw the recognition in the slight shift of his posture. "We're almost done," Marcus said, a hint of impatience in his voice. "If you wouldn't mind waiting in the living room, it'll just be a minute." David looked at me. "Ellie, are you in the middle of executing documents?" "I was about to sign," I said. He nodded slowly. Then he did something unexpected. He stepped closer to the table, not to examine the papers intrusively, but to address me directly, his voice dropping into a confidential register. "As a matter of professional courtesy, and because Bernice is a dear friend, I would advise a brief pause." His eyes held mine. "It is always prudent to have independent counsel review any document transferring significant property or powers before signing, especially when family is on the other side of the transaction." The kitchen went utterly silent. The words independent counsel and the other side of the transaction hung in the air, transforming the atmosphere. They recast Vanessa and Marcus from helpful family to opposing parties. Vanessa's composure cracked. "This is a family matter. We are her counsel." "With respect," David said, his tone never losing its calm, "you are beneficiaries. That is a conflict of interest." He turned back to me. "Ellie, my appointment with you is to review your existing estate plan. I would be happy to look at these documents as part of that service at no additional charge. It would take an hour. What is the hurry?" The question was a lifeline. I looked at my daughter. Her face was a mask of strained benevolence, but her eyes had hardened. Marcus was no longer leaning casually. He was standing straight, his jaw tight. The sweetness had evaporated, leaving behind the metallic taste of confrontation. That librarian's instinct roared back to life. This was not a book misfiled. This was a different book entirely substituted on the shelf. I placed my hand flat on the stack of papers, feeling the crisp edges under my palm. "You're right, David," I said, my voice finding a firmness I had not used in years. "There is no hurry." I looked at Vanessa. "I think it's a good idea to have my lawyer look everything over, for everyone's peace of mind." The silence that followed was a living thing. Vanessa finally forced a brittle smile. "Of course, Mom, whatever makes you comfortable." She began gathering the papers, her movements sharp. "We just want what's best for you." But I had seen it. In that frozen moment after David's warning, I had seen the flash in her eyes, not concern, but fury, quickly veiled. It was the first clear truth I had witnessed all afternoon. The pen, the papers, the sweet talk, it had all been a trap, and I had almost stepped into it. I stood there in the kitchen I had built with my life and watched my child carefully collect the instruments of my dispossession. The betrayal was not yet full. Its outline was still blurry. But the cold had begun, seeping in from the edges, hardening something deep within me. The game, I understood in that moment, was already on. They just didn't know I now knew the rules. The front door closed with a soft, definitive click. I listened to the sound of Vanessa's car engine starting, the tires crunching over the gravel of my driveway, fatting down the street. The silence they left behind was thick and heavy. David Chen remained standing in my kitchen, his briefcase on the floor beside him. He did not speak. He allowed the silence to settle, giving me time to feel the space where my daughter's presence had just been. "Would you like some tea, David?" I asked. My voice was steady. The act of offering hospitality was a reflex, a way to anchor myself in routine. "That would be kind," he said. I filled the kettle, placed it on the stove, and took down 2 mugs. My hands performed the tasks without thought. The familiar motions, the click of the gas igniter, the rattle of the tea tin, created a small, normal pocket in the upheaval. When I turned, David had taken a seat at the table. The stack of documents Vanessa had left sat between us. He had not touched them. "They will be back," I said, not as a question. "They will," he confirmed. "And they will pressure you. The story will be that they are hurt, that you don't trust them, that you are being stubborn and causing family strife. They may recruit others to plead their case." I brought the mugs to the table and sat across from him. "Tell me what the papers say." He put on his glasses, drew the stack toward him, and began to turn pages. His explanation was clear, devoid of pity, which I appreciated. He treated me as a client, not a victim. The first document is a durable power of attorney for finances. It names Vanessa as your agent. It would grant her immediate authority to manage all your assets, bank accounts, investments, property. She could buy and sell, withdraw funds, contract debts in your name. I see. The second is a revocable transfer on death deed for this property. He tapped the page. It states that upon your death, title to this house transfers directly to Vanessa Carter, outside of probate. That is common. However, combined with the power of attorney, it creates a significant vulnerability. How? With the power of attorney, she could, while you are alive, execute a current grant deed, transferring the house to herself today . She could claim it was for management purposes or estate planning. You would remain the occupant, but you would no longer be the owner. You would be a tenant in your own home. She could then legally decide to sell it or use it as collateral for a loan. Your ability to refuse would be complicated and costly. The kettle whistled. I got up, poured the hot water over the tea bags, and returned to the table. The steam rose in thin curls. And the third. The third is a living trust document. It appears comprehensive, but its primary function is to funnel all your assets into a trust she controls as trustee. The language is broad. It would give her discretion over distributions for your health and welfare, a term that can be interpreted loosely. More importantly, it names her as the sole successor trustee and beneficiary. There are no contingencies, no oversight provisions, no checks on her power. I took a sip of tea. It was too hot. The burn on my tongue was a sharp, clarifying pain. So, they were not asking me to plan for my future. They were asking me to sign it away. "That is my professional assessment," David said quietly. "The documents are not illegal in themselves, but their presentation to you, a solo senior by the sole beneficiaries without independent advice, for immediate signature, is predatory. It is a classic attempt at financial elder exploitation." The word exploitation hung in the air. It was an ugly, clinical word. It made the thing real. This was not a misunderstanding. It was a strategy. "Why?" The question left my lips before I could stop it. It was not a question for David. It was the raw, stupid cry of the betrayed. David removed his glasses. In my experience, the reasons are usually simple. Greed, a sense of entitlement, financial pressure on the children. Sometimes it is a spouse who drives it. He paused. "Your son-in-law, Marcus, does he work in finance?" "He is a manager of some kind. Investments, I think." David nodded once. "The documents are slick. They did not come from an online form. This is the work of a professional, likely one of his contacts. It is a cold transaction to them." I looked at my hands wrapped around the mug. They were my mother's hands. Strong, capable hands that had held books, kneaded dough, comforted a child. Now they were the hands of a mark, a target. The initial shock was receding, like a tide pulling back from a shore, revealing the jagged, ugly landscape beneath. The hurt was a vast, cold ocean. But on its surface, a new layer was forming. It was hard and calm and clear. "What are my options?" I asked. "You have several. The simplest is to do nothing. Refuse to sign. They cannot force you. But they will not stop. The pressure will continue and likely escalate." "And the other options?" "You can confront them directly. Show them you understand their plan. That may stop them, but it will likely sever the relationship. It also gives them time to devise another approach." Or, David said, leaning forward slightly. You can take control of the narrative. You can establish your own ironclad estate plan that removes their leverage and protects you. You can do it quietly. You can document their attempts. And you can decide from a position of strength what consequences they should face, if any. I looked at him. You are suggesting I fight. I am suggesting you defend what is yours. The law is a tool. They tried to use it as a weapon against you. You can learn to use it as a shield, perhaps later as a corrective. The cold clarity solidified. The hurt was still there, a deep, permanent ache in my chest, but it was encased now in something else, a purpose. I want to see the documents they prepared, line by line. I want to understand every clause they thought I would not comprehend. David allowed a small, respectful smile. Of course. We spent the next hour at the table. He translated the legalese into plain English. He showed me the clauses that granted unlimited discretion. He pointed out the sections where my rights were signed away. With each explanation, the betrayal became more technical, more precise. This was not a crime of passion. It was a blueprint. My daughter and her husband had sat with this blueprint, discussed it, paid for it, and brought it to my kitchen table disguised as a gift. When we finished, the tea was cold in our mugs. The afternoon sun had moved across the floor. "What is the first step?" I asked. "We schedule a formal appointment at my office. We draft a new will and a revocable living trust. You will be the trustee. We name a neutral, professional successor trustee, a bank's trust department, for instance. We specify your wishes in detail. We also execute a power of attorney for healthcare and finances, nomming someone you trust implicitly, not a beneficiary. Burness, perhaps. And this house. We ensure it is titled in the name of your trust. It becomes a protected asset. Any attempt to coerce you into changing these documents will be far more difficult. We also begin a log. You will document every interaction with Vanessa and Marcus regarding your finances or property. Dates, times, what was said. Save all texts and emails." It sounded methodical, manageable. It was a list of tasks, and I have always been good with lists. "They will ask about the papers they left. Tell them your lawyer is reviewing them. That is true. Do not lie, but do not reveal your plans. You are under no obligation to do so. You are simply being prudent, just as I advised." I stood up. He followed suit. "Thank you, David, for your honesty and for not handling me with kid gloves." "You are not a child, Ellie. You are a client who has been wronged. My job is to provide you with the tools to correct that." I walked him to the door. As he stepped out, he turned. "There is one more thing. This process will be emotionally difficult. You may wish for reconciliation. That is natural. But do not let that wish cloud your judgment. Secure your fortress first. Then you can decide if you want to open the gate." I closed the door and locked it. I returned to the kitchen. I cleared the cold tea, washed the mugs, and wiped the table clean. Then I took the stack of documents Vanessa had left, carried them to my small home office, and placed them in the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. I did not look at them again. They were evidence now. I sat at my desk, took out a fresh notebook, and wrote the date at the top of the first page. Underneath, I began my log. June 14th. Vanessa and Marcus presented documents for signature. David Chen intervened. He explained their true purpose. "I have decided not to sign. I have decided to fight." The words were simple. They were a declaration. The heartbreak was a private room I would have to visit later in the dark. But for now, I had work to do. The cold in my heart was not emptiness. It was focus. It was the first solid foundation I had felt in a long time. The notebook remained on my desk. Over the next week, I added entries with a detached precision. June 16th, Vanessa called, asked if I had a chance to look at the papers. I said David was reviewing them. She sighed, said, "I just want this off my plate, Mom." June 18th, Marcus called. Voice was cheerful, asked if my lawyer friend had finished. Said they found a great investment opportunity and having everything settled would be helpful. I repeated my answer. Each call was a data point. I logged them without emotion. In between, I met with David at his office. We executed new documents, a will, a revocable living trust with First National Bank's trust department named as successor trustee, A durable power of attorney for finances, nomming Burness, healthcare directives. The signing was a quiet, formal affair. David explained each page. I initialed and signed. The pen felt different this time. It was my instrument, not theirs. I left his office with copies in a stiff cardboard folder. I placed it in the filing cabinet above their documents. The order felt correct. The Sunday dinner was my idea. I called Vanessa on Friday. My voice was light, pleasant. "Why don't you and Marcus come for dinner this Sunday? I'm making pot roast. Your favorite. We can talk about things." The pause on the line was brief. "That sounds good, Mom. We'll be there." I knew they would interpret it as a sign of surrender. A home-cooked meal, a conciliatory gesture from a lonely old woman. I spent Sunday morning in a state of focused preparation. I seasoned the roast, chopped carrots and potatoes, set the table with my good china. The act of creation was a calming ritual. I was not preparing for a family dinner. I was preparing a stage. I was dressing the set for a performance. They arrived at 6, carrying a bottle of wine. Vanessa kissed my cheek. Marcus's smile was wide, confident. "Something smells amazing, Ellie." We made small talk in the living room. They spoke of a new restaurant downtown, of traffic, of nothing. I served the meal. For a while, there was only the sound of cutlery on plates, the routine compliments on the food. The pot roast was tender, the gravy rich. I watched them eat. It was Marcus who broke the truce. He took a sip of wine and leaned back in his chair. "So, Ellie, were you able to get those papers back from your lawyer? We really need to move on this." I took a small bite of a carrot, chewed slowly and swallowed. "David is still looking them over. He said it's quite complex. He wants to be thorough." Vanessa put her fork down. "Mom, it's not complex, it's standard. He's probably just running up the clock. Some lawyers do that." "David is Burness's friend. He's not like that," I said, keeping my tone mild. "He's been very kind. He said it's always wise to have independent advice, especially with such big decisions." "The decision is simple," Marcus said, his smile strained at the edges. "It's about family taking care of family. All this third-party review just introduces doubt. It creates conflict where there doesn't need to be any." "I'm not in conflict," I said. "I'm just being careful. You taught me that, Marcus. You're always talking about due diligence." He blinked. Vanessa jumped in. "This is different, Mom. This is us. We're not some business deal. Don't you trust us?" The question, direct and sharp, hung over the table. I looked at my daughter. I saw the calculation in her eyes, the impatience she was barely masking. This was the script. Guilt. The appeal to family loyalty. "Of course I trust you," I said, the lie smooth and practiced. "But David said something that made sense. He said if everything is above board, then having a professional review, it only makes it stronger. It protects you both, too, from any appearances of impropriety later." Marcus's jaw tightened. "What impropriety? We're trying to help you." "I know you are, and I appreciate it, but let's let David finish. He said he'd have notes for me by the end of next week." I offered a small, apologetic smile. "At my age, you learn not to rush into things." The rest of the meal was an exercise in forced civility. The conversation turned back to safe topics, but the air was thick with their frustration. Vanessa's laughter at a story was a beat too high. Marcus drank his wine more quickly. They were predators whose prey had suddenly developed a puzzling, inconvenient shell. When we finished, Vanessa helped me clear the plates. In the kitchen, as I scraped leftovers into a container, she stood close. "Mom," she said, her voice low, "I'm worried about you. This hesitation, it's not like you. Is someone putting ideas in your head? Burness, that lawyer." I closed the container lid and turned to face her. "Ideas about what, sweetheart?" "About us, that we have some ulterior motive. It hurts, Mom, after everything we do for you." I reached out and patted her arm. It was a gesture I had performed 1,000 times. It felt alien. "No one is putting ideas in my head. I'm just being sensible, that's all. Now, do you want to take some roast home?" She studied my face, searching for a crack. I held her gaze, my expression one of mild, grandmotherly concern. She saw nothing. That was the performance. No, she said finally, stepping back. We're fine. They left soon after. The goodbye hugs were stiff. From the window, I watched their car disappear. The house was quiet again, heavy with the smell of roasted meat and unease. I did not clean the kitchen immediately. I went to my desk. I opened the notebook. June 23rd, Sunday dinner. Subjects expressed impatience. Marcus stated, "We really need to move on this." Vanessa questioned my trust. They attempted to frame professional review as a source of conflict and suggested outside influence, Bernice, David. I maintained that I was being prudent. They are frustrated. No direct threats, but increased pressure noted. I closed the book. My hand was steady. The performance had been successful. I had not revealed my knowledge. I had not signed. I had bought more time. But I had also seen their true faces more clearly. The loving daughter was a role Vanessa could still play, but the mask was slipping. The financier son-in-law saw a transaction delayed, and his annoyance was professional, not personal. Their greed was a tangible thing in my dining room, sitting at the table, eating my food. I returned to the kitchen and began to wash the dishes. The hot water steamed my glasses. As I scrubbed the roasting pan, a cold realization settled upon me. This was not a misunderstanding that could be talked through. This was a negotiation where they wanted everything and I was supposed to willingly hand it over. The dinner was not a family gathering. It was the first round of a silent war. And I had just proven to myself that I could hold the line. The heartache was still there, a dull, constant ache, but it was being slowly encased in something harder, something strategic. They thought they were dealing with a lonely, pliable old woman. They were wrong. They were dealing with a librarian who knew how to research, to catalog, to wait, and who was just beginning to understand the full scope of the story they had written for me. My next task was to rewrite the ending. The silence after they left was different this time. It was not just an absence of sound. It was a space I needed to fill with something other than their calculated presence. I finished cleaning the kitchen, each movement methodical. The leftover pot roast went into the refrigerator. I would not be able to eat it. The meal was now part of the record, a prop in the performance. The next morning, I called Bernice. Her voice was a warm, familiar sound. "Ellie, I was just thinking about you. How did it go with David?" "It went," I said. "The new plans are in place, but something else has happened." I paused, choosing my words. I need to talk, not on the phone, and I need Clara there too. The change in her tone was immediate. The warmth shifted into alert concern. "Name the time and place." We met that afternoon at the community center on Maple Avenue. It was a bustling, bright place, always full of activity. We claimed our usual table in the far corner of the common room, away from the quilting group and the ping-pong players. Bernice arrived first, carrying a tray with 3 styrofoam cups of coffee. Clara came in a few minutes later, her walk steady, her large purse slung over her shoulder. Bernice, at 70, was all sharp angles and sharper wit, a retired school principal. Clara, a year my senior, was softer in appearance but possessed a quiet, unshakable fortitude from 50 years of nursing. They were my sisterhood, forged over decades of book clubs, church socials, and life's inevitable storms. "All right, Ellie," Bernice said as we settled. "Start talking. You sounded like you've seen a ghost." "Not a ghost," I said. "A blueprint." I opened my bag and placed the folder David had given me on the table. Then I told them. I described the visit, the papers, David's intervention. I recounted his explanation of the power of attorney, the deed, the trust. I repeated the conversations, the pressure, the Sunday dinner. My voice remained flat, a recitation of facts. I showed them the notebook, my log. When I finished, there was a long silence. Clara reached over and put her hand on top of mine. Her grip was firm. Bernice's lips were pressed into a thin, white line. "Those little snakes," Bernice finally said, her voice low and furious. "Your own child." "It's the husband," Clara stated, her nurse's mind diagnosing the source. "It's always the spouse who marries in and sees dollar signs. Vanessa, she got twisted up in his world. She forgot where she came from." "What did David say you should do?" Bernice asked, getting practical. "I've done the first part. The new will, the trust, the power of attorney nomming you, Bernice. Everything is secure legally. He said to document everything, to not confront them yet. Smart man, Bernice nodded. Confrontation gives them ammunition. They can play the victim. Oh, Mom's paranoid, she's turning against her family. But you can't just hide behind paperwork forever, Clara said. They're going to keep pushing. They want that house. They see it as their due. I looked at them, these two women who knew the weight of a family home. I know. David said I need to decide what consequences they should face, from a position of strength. Bernice's eyes gleamed. Consequences, I like that, not just stopping them, making them understand what they tried to do. How, I asked. This was why I had come. I had the legal shield. Now I needed the strategy, the human intelligence. Clara stirred her coffee. You have to use their own greed against them. It's their only motivation. If you just say no, they'll just look for another angle, maybe try to get you declared incompetent later. You have to make the greed backfire. A sting operation, Bernice said, leaning forward. You need to offer them something they want even more, something that seems like a win, but it's actually a trap. The word trap hung in the air. It felt severe, final. I don't want to break the law, I said. Who said anything about illegal? Bernice countered. You give them a gift, a lavish, expensive gift, one that has strings they don't see. You make them so focused on the shiny thing that they don't notice the ground shifting under their feet. Ideas began to flow between them, back and forth, a tactical dialogue born of a lifetime of wisdom and a shared sense of outrage. A trip, Clara suggested. Send them on a vacation, somewhere far, all expenses paid, non-refundable. While they're gone, Bernice picked up the thread, you reclaim your space. You get rid of all the junk they've stored in your garage, all the meaningless gifts they've given you to keep you sweet. Have a sale. Let the whole neighborhood see you're cleaning house in every sense. It shows you're not a frail old lady waiting for them to take over, Clara added. It shows agency. It sends a message. And the legal part, I asked. That comes after, Bernice said. After they come back to a changed landscape. That's when David presents the bill, the cease and desist. Maybe more, you'll have the evidence. She pointed at my notebook. That's your ammunition. Their own words, their pressure. That's financial elder abuse, Ellie. You have a case. I listened, absorbing their counsel. The cold resolve inside me, which had been a solitary, hardening mass, began to find shape and direction. It was no longer just about defense. It was about a measured, precise response. It's a lot, I said quietly. It is, Clara agreed. And it will hurt. Every step will hurt because she's your daughter. But she stopped being just your daughter the moment she brought you those papers. I knew she was right. The betrayal was not a single act. It was a campaign. My response needed to be equally deliberate. The first step is the gift, I said, thinking aloud. Something irresistible. Bernice smiled, a fierce, protective expression. We'll help you research. We'll be your counsel. No one does this to one of us. The meeting broke up an hour later. We had no detailed plan, but we had a direction, a framework. As I drove home, the loneliness was still there, but it was no longer isolating. It was a shared space now, held by the fierce loyalty of my friends. The battle was no longer mine alone. I had lieutenants. That evening, I did not add to the log of their transgressions. Instead, I started a new page. At the top, I wrote, strategy. Underneath, I listed 2 words. Bait. Reclamation. The performance was over. The planning had begun. The words bait asterisk and reclamation sat on the page, a skeletal plan. Before any move could be made, the foundation needed to be unassailable. I called David Chen's office the next morning and scheduled a follow-up appointment. His office was quiet, a space of ordered calm. Wood panels, a large desk, shelves of uniform legal volumes. David greeted me with a professional nod and gestured to the chair across from him. You have the executed documents, he said. Everything is filed. The trust is active, the house is titled to it. You are the trustee, that is your fortress as we discussed. It is, I agreed. But a fortress needs more than walls. It needs surveillance. It needs a record of every approach made against it. David steepled his fingers. You want to formalize the documentation. I do. You mentioned a log. I've started one. But I want to know what would constitute strong evidence, and I want to discuss potential countermeasures. He opened a drawer and pulled out a fresh legal pad. Let's begin with evidence. Your log is good, but supplement it. If they call, follow up with a summary email. Per our call today, you asked again about the documents. As I mentioned, they are under review. This creates a time-stamped, written record of their repeated pressure. Save all voicemails. If they visit, note it. The goal is to establish a pattern of harassment and coercion. I took out my own notebook. I understand. Now, countermeasures. The most direct would be a cease and desist letter from this office. It formally orders them to stop all contact regarding your finances and property. It is a serious step. It signals that you are prepared to involve the legal system and that their behavior is recognized as potentially abusive. And if they ignore it, then we escalate. The next step could be a petition for a restraining order based on financial elder abuse. That is a civil matter, but a serious one. It becomes a public record. Or we could pursue a civil suit for attempted fraud or undue influence. The evidence you gather now would be crucial for any of those paths. The terms were clinical, restraining order, civil suit. They were no longer abstract concepts. They were tools on a workbench, and David was showing me how each one functioned. What would a cease and desist letter do in practical terms? I asked. It would shock them. It would make it clear the confused old mother act is over. They would know you have legal counsel and are fighting back. It often stops the behavior because the perpetrators rely on secrecy and compliance. Exposure is their weakness. I considered this, a public shot across the bow. It had tactical appeal, but timing was everything. Not yet, I said. They would just become more careful or more aggressive in a different way. I need them to make a mistake first, a visible one. David nodded slowly. You are thinking strategically. That is wise. So we continue to build the record. We wait for their next move. And you decide when to play the cease and desist card. It is your card to play. There's something else, I said, thinking of Bernice and Clara's counsel. If I were to offer them a gift, something of significant monetary value but non-refundable, would that have any bearing on future proceedings? He leaned back, assessing me with new interest. It could, if you could demonstrate that they accepted a lavish gift while simultaneously attempting to coerce you out of your core asset. It further illustrates their entitlement and greed. It paints a clearer picture. But Ellie, you must not put yourself in financial jeopardy, and the gift must be truly irrevocable. No take-backs. I understand. It would be a calculated expenditure, a lure. Then document that as well. The offer, their acceptance, the proof of purchase. Keep it separate from your core assets. Use a savings account, not your primary checking. We spent the next hour going over specifics. He provided a list of phrases to listen for in their calls, phrases like "for your own good." We know best. Time is running out. Other families do this. He advised me to always ask clarifying questions in response, forcing them to state their intentions more plainly on the record. The more they talk, he said, the more they reveal. When the meeting concluded, I left with more than advice. I left with a mandate. The legal shield was not passive. It was an active instrument of intelligence gathering. At home, I went to my office. I took the original, predatory documents Vanessa had given me from the bottom drawer. I made a complete photocopy of every page. I placed the copies in a new, labeled folder in my filing cabinet. The originals I sealed in a large envelope. The next day, I took them to a notary public, a woman named Linda who worked at the shipping store downtown. I had her notarize a statement I had typed and signed. *I, Aliner Banks, declare that these documents were presented to me for signature by my daughter, Vanessa Carter, and son-in-law, Marcus Carter, on June 14th. They were presented as a simple living trust update for my protection. I did not sign them. Linda stamped and signed the statement, affixing her notary seal. I paid her fee. I then took the notarized envelope to a safety deposit box I rented at my bank, placing it inside. The originals were now secured, time-stamped, and verified by a third party. This was the paper trail. Not just a log of words, but a chain of custody for evidence. Next, I set up a new email account, one they did not know about. I used it to send summary emails to Vanessa's known address after every interaction. Dear Vanessa, following up on our call today, June 25th, when you asked for an update on the estate planning documents. As I said, my lawyer is still reviewing them. I will let you know when I have more information. Love, Mom. The tone was pleasant, harmless. The record was damning. Each action was a brick placed with care. With each brick, the cold resolve within me solidified into something like architecture. I was not just building a defense. I was constructing a case. And a case requires two parties, the victim and the perpetrator. I was methodically ensuring the roles were clearly defined, their actions meticulously recorded. The anger was there, but it had been converted into procedural energy. The sadness was a room I visited late at night, in the dark, when the work was done. During the day, I was a project manager. My project was justice. My deliverables were evidence, strategy, and a perfectly laid trap. I looked at the two words in my strategy notebook. Bait and reclamation were still just concepts, but the ground was now prepared. The legal foundation was poured and set. Anything I built upon it would stand. The next move was theirs, but the board was mine. I had studied it. I knew all the squares, and I was no longer a piece to be moved. I was the player. The board was mine, but they were growing restless. The carefully timed follow-up emails, the polite deflections on the phone, they were no longer having the desired effect of keeping them placated. The pressure was building, a simmer that was about to boil over. They did not wait for their next scheduled Sunday visit. It was a Thursday evening. The sun had just set, leaving a deep blue twilight. I was in the living room, reviewing the brochures Bernice and Clara had helped me gather for luxury resorts in the Caribbean. I was comparing cancellation policies when the headlights swept across my front window, followed by the sharp sound of a car door slamming. Then another. I closed the brochure and placed it in the drawer of the side table. I did not stand up. I listened to the hurried footsteps on the walkway, the heavy, impatient knock on my door. I took my time. I walked to the door, turned on the porch light, and looked through the peephole. Vanessa's face was distorted by the fisheye lens, her features tight. Marcus stood just behind her, his arms crossed. I unlocked the door and opened it, but I did not step aside to invite them in. Mom, Vanessa said, the word a burst of breath. We need to talk, now. This isn't a good time, I said, my voice calm. Is everything all right? No, everything is not all right, Marcus said, stepping forward into the pool of porch light. We've been patient, we've been understanding, but this has gone on long enough. What has gone on long enough? I asked, keeping my hand on the doorframe. The papers, Ellie, Marcus's voice rose. The trust, your lawyer has had them for weeks. What is there to review? It's a standard document. David said it's complex. I'm relying on his expertise. Vanessa cut in, her tone pleading but edged with steel. Mom, you're not listening to us. You're listening to a stranger. We are your family. We want what's best for you. This delay, it's hurting us. It feels like you don't trust us. I looked at her, at the performance of wounded love. I told you, it's not about trust. It's about being thorough. We got a call from the title company today, Marcus stated bluntly, his patience gone. They said there's a new filing on the property, a transfer into a trust, an asterisk Aliner Banks Living Trust asterisk. What is that? So they had been monitoring the property records. Of course they had. Their investment was at stake. I did not flinch. That is my trust, the one I established with my lawyer. The silence was instantaneous and total. Vanessa's mouth opened slightly. Marcus's face flushed a dark red in the yellow light. You established your own trust, Vanessa whispered, the words barely audible. Yes, to manage my assets, including the house. With who? Marcus demanded. With that Chen guy, without consulting us. I did consult a lawyer, my lawyer, David Chen. He helped me put my affairs in order as I saw fit. I kept my gaze level. It seemed the prudent thing to do. Vanessa's wounded expression shattered, replaced by raw fury. How could you, behind our backs, After everything we've done for you, we brought you a simple solution." "It wasn't a solution, Vanessa. It was a transfer of everything I own to you. My lawyer explained it to me, the power of attorney, the deed. I understood what I was being asked to sign." The admission hung in the cool evening air. I had said it. I had revealed my knowledge. Marcus pointed a finger at me. His hand was shaking. "He poisoned you against us. That ambulance chaser put ideas in your head. You're being paranoid and stupid." I felt the insult like a physical blow, but it only hardened my resolve. "He showed me the words on the page, Marcus. The words you brought into my house. There was no poison, just clarity." Vanessa took a step forward, invading the threshold. "So what, Mom? What now? You're going to lock us out. You're going to let some bank manage your life instead of your own daughter." "The bank is the successor trustee," I corrected quietly. "I am the trustee. I am managing my life. That is the point." "You are tearing this family apart," she screamed. The sound was shocking in the quiet neighborhood. A light flicked on in the house next door. "Over what? Over a piece of paper? We are your only family." "You were," I said, the words leaving my lips before I could consider them. They were true. "When you tried to trick me out of my home, you stopped being my family. You became a business proposition. I am simply responding in kind." Marcus grabbed Vanessa's arm, pulling her back. He was looking at me with pure, unvarnished hatred. "You listen to me, you ungrateful old woman. We will fight this. That trust is undue influence. We will contest it. You are not in your right mind. We'll have you declared incompetent so fast it'll make your head spin." The threat, spoken aloud, was a gift. It was the mistake I needed, the escalation. I stood straighter, filling the doorway. "You are welcome to try, Marcus. My lawyer has all the documentation. He has the papers you tried to get me to sign. He has my medical records which show I am perfectly sound. And he has a record of this conversation." I glanced meaningfully toward my living room window. "Now, you need to leave my property. If you do not, I will call the police." For a moment, I thought Marcus might rush me. His body was coiled, his fists clenched. But the porch light illuminated us both, a staged scene for any watching neighbors. The threat of the police, of public scandal, registered. He was a finance manager. Appearances mattered. "This isn't over," he spat. "I know it isn't," I replied. He turned, dragging a stunned, crying Vanessa with him. They stumbled back to their car. The engine roared to life and they sped away, tires squealing. I closed the door. I locked it. I engaged the deadbolt. My heart was pounding, a rapid drum against my ribs. I walked to the living room window and watched the neighbor's light turn off. Then I went to my desk. My hands were steady. I opened the notebook. July 11th, 8:17 p.m. Vanessa and Marcus arrived unannounced. Confrontation at front door. They discovered the new trust. Marcus stated, "We will have you declared incompetent." He called me ungrateful old woman and paranoid and stupid. Vanessa accused me of tearing the family apart, threatened legal contest. I ordered them to leave and threatened to call police. They left. Witness, neighbor, light on. I closed the book. The performance was over. The covert war was now overt. They had shown their ultimate hand, the threat of incompetence. They had raged and insulted me on my own porch. The evidence was no longer just about papers. It was about conduct, character. The cold inside me was absolute now, a glacial calm. The last shred of hope that this was a terrible misunderstanding was gone, shredded by their furious words on my doorstep. The path ahead was clear. They had forced the confrontation. Now they would face the consequences. The bait was no longer just an idea. It was a necessity. It was time to dangle the shiny object and watch them leap. The glacial calm held. In the days following the porch confrontation, there were no calls, no messages. The silence was not peaceful. It was the quiet of a battlefield after the first artillery barrage, each side regrouping. I knew their next move would be legal. Marcus's threat to have me declared incompetent was not an empty one. It was the logical escalation of their plan. My response needed to be twofold: a formal legal warning and a strategic distraction. I called David Chen. "It's time for the cease and desist letter," I said without preamble. I anticipated you might say that, he replied. Based on your latest entry. Yes, the threat of a competency petition changes things. I want it on record that I consider their harassment a prelude to that, and I want them ordered to stop. I'll draft it today. It will be sent certified mail, return receipt requested. They will have to sign for it. That creates an undeniable record of receipt. The letter will state that any further contact regarding your finances or property, or any attempt to interfere with your personal or legal autonomy, will be met with immediate legal action, including but not limited to petitions for restraining orders and civil suits for financial elder abuse. Good, I said. Send it to their home address. Consider it done. The first move was defensive, a formalization of the boundary. The second move was the turn, the bait. With the legal warning en route, their greed would be inflamed and frustrated. That was the moment to offer an alternative gratification. I met Bernice and Clara at the community center. I spread the resort brochures on the table. It needs to be irresistible, I said. Lavish, obviously expensive, and completely non-refundable. Clara pointed to a glossy page. This one, 7 nights in St. Lucia, all-inclusive platinum package, private plunge pool, butler service, it screams status. It's the kind of thing Marcus would brag about at his office. Bernice examined the fine print. Non-refundable, non-transferable, paid in full at booking. If they cancel for any reason, they get a credit for a future stay, but only within a year, and it's subject to blackout dates and a hefty rebooking fee. It's a maze. They'd never untangle it in time. How much? I asked. Just over $9,000. It was a significant sum, but it was not taken from my core savings. It came from a separate account, money Robert had left me that I had always considered for emergencies or foolishness, as he used to say. This qualified as both. They will question it, Clara noted. After a cease and desist letter, a lavish gift, they'll be suspicious. They will, I agreed. But their greed will override their caution, especially Marcus. He will see it as a peace offering, a guilt payment from a mother who knows she's been paranoid. He'll rationalize it. And Vanessa, she'll see it as her due, a consolation prize for not getting the house. We finalized the details. The timing was critical. The gift would be announced after they received the lawyer's letter. The contrast would be jarring, designed to confuse and entice. 2 days later, David confirmed the cease and desist letters had been delivered and signed for. The trap was now armed. I waited one more day. Then, on a Friday afternoon, a time when they might be thinking of weekend distractions, I called Vanessa. I used my landline. I had my notebook open. She answered after 4 rings. Her voice was cold. Mother. Vanessa, I said, my tone deliberately weary, softer than usual. I received confirmation that you got a letter from my lawyer. We did. It's outrageous. It's hurtful. I know it seems that way. I allowed a sigh to travel down the line. This whole situation, it's broken my heart. I never wanted this strife. A pause. She was listening, wary. I've been doing a lot of thinking, I continued. About family, about what's important. The house, that's my home. I can't part with it, not while I'm alive. That's my final word on that. I let that settle, a firm denial on the main prize. Then I shifted. But I don't want us to be enemies. I know you and Marcus have been under stress. You work so hard. I wanted to do something nice, for you both. As my daughter and son-in-law, a gesture. What kind of gesture? The suspicion was palpable, but so was the curiosity. I've booked a trip for you. A vacation, to St. Lucia. A week at a top resort, all-inclusive. It's paid for, everything. The silence on the other end was profound. I could almost hear the calculations whirring. You booked us a vacation, she repeated, incredulous. Yes, I know things have been tense. I thought you could use a chance to get away, to relax. It's my gift. No strings. Why would you do that now? The question was sharp. Because I can, I said simply. And because, despite everything, you are my child. I don't want to fight, I just want peace. This is my offer of peace. A week in paradise. The booking confirmation and itinerary will be emailed to you. It's in your names. It's non-refundable, so I hope you'll use it. I ended the call before she could interrogate further. The hook was set. Now to watch. The reaction was not immediate. An hour later, my phone rang. It was Marcus. "Vanessa told me about this trip," he said, his voice a blend of confusion and avarice. "It's a gift," I reiterated. "It's very generous, unexpected." "Consider it an apology for the unpleasantness," I said, feeding the narrative he wanted. "Well, we'll have to check our calendars, of course." He was trying to sound controlled, but I heard the eagerness. "The dates are fixed," I said. "The third week of August. I've already paid. If you can't go, well, it would be a shame to waste it." I left the implication hanging, a $9,000 shame. "We'll look at it," he said and hung up. I knew they would go. Their avarice was a stronger force than their pride or their suspicion. The cease and desist letter established me as a formidable opponent. The gift re-established me as a pliable, guilty mother. They would accept the contradiction because the prize was tangible and luxurious. The next day, the email confirmation from the resort showed the booking had been accessed. Then, a text arrived from Vanessa. It was brief. "Thank you for the trip, Mom. We've decided to accept. We hope this is a new start." I did not reply. I opened my notebook and made a new entry. July 19th. Cease and desist letter delivered and signed for. July 20th. Offered Vanessa and Marcus all expenses paid, non-refundable vacation to St. Lucia, Emerald Shores Resort, Platinum Package. They accepted via text message at 2:14 p.m. Rationale: a new start. I closed the notebook. The first active move was complete. The legal warning had been issued. The bait, worth $9,000 of Robert's foolishness fund, had been swallowed. They were now looking at a calendar, dreaming of tropical sun, believing they had won a consolation prize. They did not understand it was not a prize. It was a timer. Once they boarded that plane, the clock would start on the second phase, reclamation. I allowed myself a single, thin smile as I filed the resort's confirmation and their text message printout into the growing evidence folder. The game was progressing according to plan. The confirmation email from the airline arrived the morning of their departure. Their flight to St. Lucia left at 10:45 a.m. I knew this because I had booked it. I sat at my kitchen table with a second cup of coffee and watched the clock. At 10:50, I opened a flight tracking website on my tablet and entered their flight number. A tiny icon of an airplane began its journey southeast, over the Atlantic. I watched it for a full minute, a simple blue symbol moving across a map. Then I closed the browser. I stood up. The house was quiet. I walked to the garage door, opened it, and flicked on the light. The space was crowded, not with my things, but with theirs. Over the years, it had become a storage unit for Vanessa and Marcus. A set of sleek but uncomfortable patio furniture they had replaced. Boxes of old textbooks and college memorabilia Vanessa couldn't bear to part with but didn't want in her condo. A large, abstract painting Marcus had bought at a corporate art auction, a garish thing of swirls and sharp angles he thought looked sophisticated. An expensive but faulty espresso machine. Several sealed boxes I had never been permitted to open. For 2 weeks, Bernice, Clara, and I had prepared. We had sorted, categorized, and priced every item. We had not asked permission. These were items abandoned in my home, and I was claiming the right to dispose of them. It was not theft, it was reclamation of space. Bernice and Clara arrived at 11, armed with clipboards, price stickers, and a cash box. Clara's grandson, Theo, a strong young man in his 20s, came with a truck to help move the heavier pieces. "The Eagle has flown," Bernice asked as she walked in, her eyes bright. "The Eagle has flown," I confirmed. "Then let's get to work." We moved with an efficient, assembly line rhythm. Theo and I carried items from the garage to the front yard. Bernice and Clara arranged them on tables and tarps we had set up the night before. We hung the awful painting from a stand. We assembled the patio set. We opened the mystery boxes. They were full of more of Marcus's aspirational clutter. A set of golf clubs he never used, a box of designer leather binders, a vintage cigar humidor. By 2 o'clock, my front lawn was transformed into a bizarre museum of my daughter and son-in-law's discarded materialism. At the curb, We placed a large, hand-painted sign Bernice had made. Estate sale, DOWNSIZNG. Everything must go. The neighbors came, first out of curiosity, then out of a growing, unspoken understanding. Mrs. Henderson from across the street, who had seen the porch confrontation, picked up a crystal vase Vanessa had given me one Mother's Day. It had never been to my taste. "This is lovely, Ellie. Are you sure?" "I'm sure," I said. $5. She handed me a $5 bill, her eyes soft with sympathy. "Good for you," she murmured and took the vase. Mr. Jenkins, 2 doors down, bought the golf clubs for his son. A young couple new to the neighborhood bought the patio set for a steal. A college student was thrilled with the textbooks. The painting proved a hard sell until Clara, with a perfectly straight face, told a browsing couple it was a powerful example of neo-corporate dissonance. They bought it for $40. With each sale, with each item carried away, I felt a physical lightening. These objects were not memories, they were weights, symbols of their presence, their judgment, their encroachment. Letting them go was not loss, it was excavation. Vanessa's old college boxes were the hardest. They contained faded photos, dance programs, dried corsages. I felt a sharp pang looking at them, a glimpse of the girl she was before Marcus, before the greed. I saved a single picture of her at 16, laughing, her hair in braids. The rest, along with the yearbooks and notebooks, went into a box marked free. A teenager took it, eager for vintage paper for an art project. The sale was also a performance for the neighborhood. It was my public declaration. I was not a helpless woman being stripped of her assets. I was an agent, actively streamlining my life, selling the vestiges of a relationship that had turned toxic. The story would get around. It would provide context for anything that might come later. By 5 o'clock, almost everything was gone. We had made just over $800. Theo loaded the few unsold items into his truck to donate to a thrift store. The front yard was empty, just grass slightly flattened under the weight of tables now folded and put away. We sat at my kitchen table, the 4 of us, counting the cash. The atmosphere was not celebratory, but satisfied. A job well planned and executed. "They'll find out," Clara said, sipping a glass of iced tea. "Someone will mention it, or they'll come looking for something." "I know," I said. "That's part of it." "How does it feel?" Bernice asked, her gaze direct. I looked around my kitchen, then through the doorway to the living room, now clearer, less cluttered. I inhaled. The air itself felt different. "It feels like my house again," I said, and it was true. The physical removal of their stored possessions was a symbolic eviction. Their claim, both emotional and physical, had been publicly dissolved for the price of a garage sale. After they left, I took a long shower. I dressed in clean clothes. I walked through every room of my house. I opened closets. The spaces that had been crammed were now orderly, containing only my history, my choices. The silence was no longer the silence of waiting for the next attack. It was the silence of reclaimed peace. I went to my desk. I did not make an entry in the log of their transgressions. Instead, I opened the strategy notebook. I drew a firm line through the word reclamation asterisk. Phase 2 was complete. The bait had been taken. The space had been cleared. They were in the Caribbean, unaware that the landscape of home had been permanently altered. When they returned, they would not be returning to the same place or the same woman. They would be returning to a defendant, one who had spent their absence meticulously preparing the courtroom. I closed the notebook. The timer was still ticking. I had a week of peace to enjoy before the final act began. A week of peace was a period of intense preparation. David Chen and I met twice at his office. We organized the evidence into a chronological narrative, the notarized envelope from the safety deposit box, the logbook entries, the follow-up emails. The recorded voicemails. David had advised me, after the porch incident, to begin recording all calls, which was legal in our state as a one-party consent. The cease and desist letter with their signed receipt. The text message accepting the vacation gift. Photographs of the estate sale, including the sign. Written statements from Bernice and Clara attesting to the items sold and the nature of the sale. My updated medical evaluation, confirming my sound mental capacity. It formed a binder 2 inches thick. David filed a civil complaint for attempted financial elder abuse, fraud, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. He also petitioned for a permanent restraining order barring them from contacting me regarding financial matters or entering my property. The court date was set, but first, mandatory mediation was ordered. Their flight returned on a Sunday evening. I knew because I tracked it. The mediation was scheduled for 10 o'clock Monday morning. They had less than 12 hours to discover the sale, process their rage, and receive the formal court summons delivered by a process server to their condo door. David timed it perfectly. I did not hear from them that night. The silence was more telling than any outburst. The next morning, David picked me up in his car. We did not speak on the way to the mediation center. I wore a simple navy blue dress. I carried a small handbag. He carried the binder. The mediation room was neutral, beige walls, a long table, uncomfortable chairs. Vanessa and Marcus were already there when we entered, seated across from an empty chair for the mediator. Marcus's face was a thundercloud. Vanessa's eyes were red-rimmed, puffy. She would not look at me. A woman named Patricia, the mediator, entered and introduced herself. She explained the process. Then she turned to David. "Counselor, would you like to begin with a statement?" David opened the binder. "Yes. My client, Eleanor Banks, is here today to seek resolution for a sustained campaign of financial exploitation and coercion initiated by her daughter, Vanessa Carter, and son-in-law, Marcus Carter." Marcus made a derisive sound. Vanessa stared at the table. David continued, his voice calm and precise. He summarized the events, starting with the presentation of the predatory documents. He referenced the notarized originals. He read excerpts from my log, highlighting their escalating pressure. He played a 30-second clip from a voicemail where Marcus said, "We really need to move on this, Ellie. Time isn't on your side." He presented the cease and desist letter. Then he addressed the vacation. While subject to this harassment, and in a misguided attempt to placate her child, Mrs. Banks gifted the respondents a $9,000 non-refundable vacation. They accepted it eagerly. While they were abroad, Mrs. Banks reclaimed her home by selling items they had stored on her property without compensation. This was a symbolic act of re-establishing autonomy. Finally, he slid copies of the filed complaint across the table. Given the severity of the attempted exploitation and the respondent's subsequent threat to have my client declared incompetent, we have filed this civil action. We are also seeking a permanent restraining order. The purpose of this mediation is to determine if a settlement can be reached to avoid a public trial, which would likely be damaging to Mr. Carter's professional reputation and to my client's emotional well-being. The room was silent. Patricia, the mediator, looked at Vanessa and Marcus. "Would you like to respond?" Marcus slammed his hand on the table. "This is absurd. She's twisting everything. We were trying to help her. She's an old woman who got spooked by a lawyer looking for a payday." David did not flinch. The documents speak for themselves. A power of attorney and transfer on death deed presented together, without independent counsel, constitutes a classic exploitation attempt. Your threat of a competency petition, recorded by my client, demonstrates continued malicious intent. Vanessa finally looked up. Her gaze was not on David, but on me. It was full of a toxic mix of hatred and betrayal. "You sold my things, my college memories. You had a yard sale for the whole neighborhood to see. How could you?" I met her eyes. I said nothing. My silence was my statement. "You humiliated us," she whispered. "You tried to steal from me," I replied, my voice even. "The humiliation was your choice." Patricia intervened. "The legal claims are serious. The evidence presented is substantial. A court is likely to view this as a textbook case of attempted elder abuse. The penalties can include compensatory damages, punitive damages, and of course, the restraining order. A public trial would also be a matter of public record." She paused, letting the professional consequences for Marcus sink in. "My role is to see if we can find a settlement that addresses Mrs. Banks's concerns and allows everyone to move forward." Marcus was breathing heavily, his lawyer's mind undoubtedly calculating the cost of a trial versus settlement. The confident schemer was gone, replaced by a cornered man staring at legal and professional ruin. "What does she want?" he asked, the words gritted out. David answered. "First, a signed agreement, legally binding, that renounces any and all future claims to Mrs. Banks's property, including her home and any assets in her trust. Second, reimbursement of all her legal fees incurred to date. Third, a mutual agreement for no contact, except for emergencies arranged through legal representatives, for a period of 5 years. Fourth, the withdrawal of any and all threats, implicit or explicit, regarding her competency. In return, we will drop the civil suit and modify the restraining order to a mutual no-contact order." "You want us to pay her legal bills," Marcus choked. "You caused them," David said simply. Vanessa was crying now, silent tears tracking through her makeup. She was not crying for me or for our relationship. She was crying for her lost prize, her shattered narrative, her exposed shame. The mediation lasted another 2 hours. There was haggling. Marcus tried to argue the legal fees down. David held firm. In the end, they agreed to all terms. The alternative was a public airing of their greed, with a high probability they would lose and owe far more. Patricia typed up the summary of agreement. We all signed it. Their signatures were jagged, angry scrawls. Mine was the same steady hand that had signed my trust. As we stood to leave, Vanessa finally spoke to me directly, her voice raw. "I hope you're happy in your empty house." I looked at her, my daughter, now a legal adversary. "I will be," I said, and I turned and walked out with David. In the car, I let out a long breath. The cold focus that had sustained me for weeks did not evaporate, but it shifted. A deep, weary sadness settled in its place, but it was a clean sadness. It was over. "You did well, Ellie," David said. "It's a strong, enforceable agreement. You are protected." "Thank you, David, for everything." He drove me home, to my house, my empty, clean, fully reclaimed house. The battlefield was quiet. The war was won. All that remained was to learn how to live in the peace I had fought for. The signed settlement agreement arrived by courier 1 week later. I placed it on the kitchen table, unopened, for a full day. There was no urgency anymore. The fight was over. When I finally slit the envelope, I reviewed the terms I already knew: their legal renunciation of any claim to my assets, the structured reimbursement of David's fees, the 5-year no-contact order. The ink was dry. The matter was closed. The first check from Marcus cleared without issue. I used a portion to pay David Chen's final invoice. The remainder, combined with the $800 from the estate sale, amounted to a modest sum. It was not blood money, it was reparation. I thought of the predatory documents, the pressure, the threat on my porch. Then I thought of others who might not have a David or a Bernice to intervene. I wrote a check to the local Center for Elder Rights and Advocacy. I mailed it anonymously. The money would not undo what happened to me, but it might help someone else see the trap before the spring closed. Life resumed its rhythm, but the rhythm was now of my own making. I took a gardening class at the community center. I finally read the novels that had been gathering dust on my nightstand. I had lunch with Bernice and Clara every Tuesday. Our conversations were no longer strategic councils of war. They were filled with gossip, book recommendations, and plans for a day trip to the botanical gardens. The space they occupied in my life was warm and uncomplicated. One afternoon in late September, the light was particularly clear, a golden haze that poured through my west-facing living room windows. I had spent the day cleaning, not out of necessity, but out of a sense of care. The house gleamed. It was quiet. I realized the quiet no longer felt like loneliness. It felt like peace. I called Bernice and Clara. "Come over," I said. "I'll make tea." They arrived within the hour, bearing a plate of cookies from Clara's kitchen. We settled in my living room, the same room where the original documents had been presented months before. The memory was present, but it had lost its power to wound. It was now a fact of history, a closed case. "So," Bernice said, taking a delicate sip of her Earl Grey, "how does it feel, the silence?" I looked around the room. My books were neatly aligned on the shelves. A single photograph of Robert and a young Vanessa sat on the mantel. The floors were clear. The air was clean. "It feels like mine," I said. "Truly mine. For the first time in a long time, I'm not waiting for the next phone call, the next visit, the next pressure. I'm just living in my house." Clara nodded. "You took it back, every inch." I did. I did not say it with triumph, but with simple acknowledgement. The anger is gone. There's a sadness, of course. It's a permanent sort of sadness. But it's not corrosive anymore. It's just there, like a scar. "Scars mean you healed," Bernice observed. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment. The only sound was the faint clink of a spoon against a china cup. "Have you heard anything?" Clara asked gently. "Through David. The legal fees are being paid on schedule. He monitors it. I've asked him not to tell me anything else unless it's a breach of the agreement. There has been no breach." I had no desire to know about their lives, their anger, their excuses. They were on the other side of a legally drawn line. That was enough. The conversation drifted to other things. Bernice's grandson was applying to colleges. Clara was thinking of adopting a cat. We planned our next book club selection. The ordinary, gentle concerns of a life being lived. As the afternoon light began to fade, casting long, warm shadows across the floor, I felt a profound sense of completeness. The vengeance I had plotted had not been violent or cruel. It had been a meticulous, lawful reclamation of what was mine. My home, my autonomy, my peace of mind. I had used their own weapons, paperwork, greed, strategy, and I had disarmed them. The lesson was taught, not through shouting, but through the quiet, unassailable power of the law and a mother's shattered but resilient will. My daughter had said, "We need you to sign this." I had signed something else instead. I had signed my own declaration of independence. After my friends left, I washed the teacups and put the cookies away. I turned off the lights downstairs and walked up to my bedroom. The house settled around me, a familiar, protective presence. I stood at the window for a moment, looking out at my quiet street. A few leaves had begun to turn. I thought of Robert. I wished he could have seen this, seen me not as the grieving widow he left behind, but as the woman who could still fight for the life they built together. I think he would have been proud. I got into bed. The sheets were cool and clean. In the darkness, the house was not empty. It was full of my history, my choices, and the hard-won silence that was now my own. The story was over. The pen was finally put down. I closed my eyes and slept, deeply and without dreams, in my house, my peace.